Have you got all your addictions handled? Are we okay? You know, after studying all the addiction studies, I've determined that I'm an oxygen addict. Withdrawal symptoms include death. So I want you to remember that next time you hear about junkies withdrawing and they go through these terrible spasms and stuff. I want you to think what happens next time you give up water for 5 days. See if you don't go through withdrawal symptoms. Give up oxygen for a couple of minutes at the hands of, let's say, the Boston Strangler and see what happens. I thought of a couple of things during the break that I neglected to mention during the responsibility section, and I want to take responsibility for them. So I'd like you to add this to the section on responsibility. A couple questions you might ask yourself when it doesn't seem like you made the event happen. I mean, it's true that we can, in fact, be victims at different times. You could have a sniper, you know, on the tower shoot you. You could have someone run into you in a car. You can't always control what comes into your life, but you can control how you handle it. That is taking responsibility. You can't always control. Someone could leave you. Your partner could leave you. You know, that can happen romantically. I've had it happen to me. What poor taste. But you can have that occur.
That's the evasion of responsibility right there.
I know it is. But I take responsibility for evading in a very responsible manner. In fact, when someone leaves, they might leave for their own reasons. Nothing wrong with you. All right? How you handle it is your responsibility. Now, a good sentence to ask yourself, a good question is, if I were fully responsible for the outcome in this situation, what would I be doing right now? I'd be listening to a beep beep. Or a second sentence, if I could produce the results I want in my life, what would I be doing right now? Now, a couple things you need to know about responsibility. Is anybody here a good starter of things but not a good finisher? All right, well, you know, it seems normal human behavior. Let me tell you something. You never have to finish anything. Michael wants to tell you, you do not have to finish anything. You don't even have to finish your life if you don't want. Keep on doing it. As long as you remember one thing, and that is to keep starting. When you don't know what to do, start. And that's equally true in responsibility. If you're not sure how to take responsibility, start. You'll learn as you go along. There's a quote that I loved. I don't remember who it was from, but it said, life is a violin that one simultaneously constructs and learns to play as he goes along. Life is a violin that you both build and learn to play as you go along. And that's true of responsibility. If you're not sure how to take responsibility, start. Yes?
Samuel Butler.
Who was?
Samuel Butler.
Was it? Thank you.
Life is like playing a violin in public and learning an instrument as one goes on.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That was much better than my rendition of it. Samuel Butler. You know what? I like being around smart. No, this is one of the reasons I like being around smart people. When I screw up a quote, we get it right before I'm done with it. I don't mind that. Some people mind being corrected. I don't mind because I'm corrected so often I've just given up minding. I take responsibility for not minding. Now, did any questions occur regarding responsibility during the break? Because usually people at different points in their life I'm responsible, but not now. I'll be responsible tomorrow. You know, the Gone with the Wind strategy. Tomorrow will be another day. I'll take responsibility then. Yeah, that's it. That's the ticket. Tomorrow. This wasn't really my responsibility because Mark took responsibility. Yeah, Mark did it. Yeah, it's his fault. Then my life is screwed up. Yes?
I need to go one step further. I think you're actually responsible for everything that happens, including like totally random events like Hurricane Hugo flying into, or, you know, I've had so many things happen to me that are in fact completely random, but the thing is, everything that proceeds from that event is totally within your control. You know, I mean, acts of nature are outside your control, and I suppose totally random things like getting hit by a fire truck, which is an incredibly rare aberration in life anyway. But those things may happen, but everything that proceeds from there is within your control, because you can turn any bad event, in my experience, into a good event, or you can dwell on it and become a victim and feel that it is much worse than it actually even is.
That goes back to the sentence that you don't always cause things to come into your life, but you are responsible for how you handle them. what you do with the event once it comes in there. Yes, sir.
If you get hit by a fire truck, you would take responsibility for putting yourself in that position.
Yeah. You were the one that walked across the street. You know, you're the one that didn't look both ways. I would make exceptions like people getting mugged. I would make exceptions about people that contracted illnesses through no choice of their own. I had a lung condition where I was in the hospital, and I did not choose the lung. My mother gave it to me as part of the DNA deal I got. And I didn't select her as my mother. I would have made a much richer choice, I've got to tell you. Had I selected my parents, they would have been very wealthy. They would have been long-lived. I would have been about 4 inches taller. I wouldn't have ever had any problems with eating because my body would burn off anything I ate.
I want to get up to the front that
Yes.
you're confusing yourself with your body.
What's that?
I think you're confusing yourself with your body.
I take it with me everywhere I go.
That's right, I take it with you.
Yes.
You are not it.
Oh, I know that. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to further. You just have to look at maybe that pretend everybody was born that way.
Sure.
And therefore, it's just again a neutral position.
Sure.
Like I don't know if anybody here has ever done this, but I always thought, well, what if I was quadriplegic? What if I was blind? I've actually thought, would I get really depressed with most? I probably would for a short term. I guess everybody would. But I thought of all the things I could still do that I enjoy doing, even if my hearing were gone and my eyesight were gone, or an arm were gone.
Were you impotent?
Well, I was impotent. Of course, that's a fate worse than death. But and
For you, perhaps, but there are women in this country that pray for it every day.
And I actually thought,
And their husbands.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, did I do that right? Thank you. I take responsibility for doing it right.
well, you got my point anyway.
Yes, I got your point. Yes.
One of the things, sort of a hidden danger, when bad things happen, whether or not you brought them into your life through deliberate action or lack of making decisions or not, there are people who will try to comfort you by telling you that it's not your fault.
And that's no comfort.
And that it's okay to completely go to pieces and give up responsibility for the rest of your life. They're not going to say it that way, but I have noticed that I've made mistakes. It's not a shattering experience anymore, and on occasion the consequences have been immediate and rather shattering. And when I say, oh boy, I'm not going to do that anymore, I get nailed by people who care about me saying, don't be so hard on yourself, it wasn't your fault. Well, that means that this could happen to me again at any time and I have no control over it. This helps. I feel better now.
This is great. Kick me. I'm around. Okay, now. The comment that Mark made, let me share a story with you about. I remember as a kid watching the Ed Sullivan shows. Anybody remember the old Ed Sullivan show? And the younger ones of you are going to claim you saw it on video reruns, aren't you, you liars? Now, I remember the first time that I saw it, there was this, I think about a 9-year-old little black kid that they were going to bring out, and you should feel sorry for him because he's black and he's blind and he's from Detroit, right? His name was Little Stevie Wonder. And when he was out there, at first he saw his dark glasses, and you could almost hear the audience go, oh, the poor boy, he's blind. And then he started playing, and they forgot all about it. See, Stevie Wonder got dealt a bad hand by being blind, but he played it as well as he could. He took responsibility and became a wonderful musician. I like his music. He got a different hand than you and I did. We've got he has all the excuse in the world to beg for a tin cup, a white cane, and a dog that doesn't bite. And he didn't play that game. He took responsibility. Now, you got your eyesight. You don't have the excuse. He does. And he doesn't use the excuse. And that's equally true of people like Helen Keller. If you talk to people, you remember seeing the guy climb up the face of that mountain, the guy with the broken legs? Do you know how he lost the use of his legs? Climbing accident. He was determined he was going to climb again. He had a climbing accident. He fell, and it was like 150 feet onto solid rock, and it shattered his spine, and he lost the use of his legs. Here's a man who lived to climb, and he refused to lay down. You can't always control whether you get knocked down, but you can control whether you stay down. And he decided he was going to climb that, by God, and he did. And that's a living example of someone taking responsibility. someone taking his life back into his hands. And I have nothing but respect and admiration for people that do that. And they make me realize, and they make all of us realize, that we don't have any excuses. Well, we do, but they're all lies. You got to remember the word rationalize means rational lies. Write that down. Next time you rationalize, remember what you were stooping to. Now, I never used to talk about responsibility in seminars, as Mark will remember. I didn't really talk about it as a section. And I came to realize that that was a missing factor in the freedom equation. We forget it. We forget it in politics, and we forget it personally. I'm responsible for communicating to you. I'm responsible when you're talking to me to listen to you good and hard, because I want to know what you're talking about. I'm responsible for how I deal with you. And if it doesn't work the way I want it to, I'm responsible for changing it until I'm happy with it. I take my responsibilities very seriously because I know what passivity produces. If you want to play the victim, your whole life falls apart. I have played the victim before. Has anybody played the victim before? You want to feel sorry for yourself? Nobody loves me. Why haven't I been discovered yet? Because nobody knows you're lost, that's why. Why hasn't this occurred? Why haven't I been discovered at a lunch counter? Someone go, excuse me, you look like the kind of guy who'd be a damn fine comedian. How about coming on over? We've got a stage waiting for you at Caesars. Ooh, you'll do the lead act for Wayne Newton, the Midnight Idol. Well, life doesn't work like that. You know, this is not a dress rehearsal as far as I can tell. This is the final act. And you get to do it again and again and again and again and again until you decide that you're tired of it, and then you put an end to the final act and let the curtain down and hopefully get applause. What? Get a good vacation. All right. During this week that comes up, at different times, you're going to have reasons, you're going to have rationalizations as to why you were not responsible. You're going to rationalize blaming people. You're going to rationalize why someone didn't understand you. And I want you to realize something. Every time you blame someone else, you give up power over the outcome. Every time you blame someone else for you not getting an education, or you not being in the right marriage, or you not being in the right job, or not earning enough money, or not having this work or that work, every time you blame someone other than yourself, and I don't want you to blame yourself either. I simply want you to realize that it's in your hands. Your life is in your hands. All you have to do is do what you want to do. But if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. Do you like what you're getting? If you don't, change what you're doing. That's obvious. Write it down. Now we're going to do political cross-dressing, then we're going to have lunch. Political cross-dressing, does everybody here sort of know what political cross-dressing is about? Because I want to play with some new stuff if you do. Who doesn't? Please raise your hand. It's okay. We'll start with basics then. By the way, these are in my tapes, The Essence of Political Persuasion, which I'm going to make everybody hear a really neat deal and give you an opportunity to do something wonderful today. I've not only got the Mind Focus tapes available, which these are prototype tapes, which I gave the first two sets to two very good friends of mine, Mark Emerling and Robert Metz, two people that I admire very much and respect very much. And since they're holding my airline ticket, I'm in their hands. I'm just kidding. They didn't do that. I'm going to be offering these tapes to you, and not only will you get the tapes for a hell of a deal, but you'll get the knowledge that you're helping me finish my book, Self-Reliance Reborn, which will be out next year. It'll give me one more month to finish it, and then I'm done. Then I can move on to my next book, and that's going to be fun too. Okay, we're going to talk about political cross-dressing. This is something I invented, discovered, stole, borrowed, I don't know what you call it, years ago. I remember reading a Playboy interview with Milton Friedman. Everybody know Milton Friedman? Uncle Milty? I like Milton Friedman. I really like him. He's a good communicator. He made a comment. They asked him, this, what about minimum wage? And dig this. He said, look, you rarely find poor people testifying before Congress or in Ottawa on behalf of minimum wage. Guess who shows up? The representatives of unions. Because every time minimum wage goes up, many people are rendered less competitive, and they can keep their union rates up high. As a matter of fact, John Kennedy admitted that when he was a senator from Massachusetts and testified on behalf of minimum wage. Why are you doing it? Is it for the poor? No, I've got some unions that need this minimum wage propped up so we can keep their wages up. What are they telling you? They're telling you that big unions are benefiting, not the poor. Well, it's rather interesting. I read that and I said, that's interesting. That's interesting that he looked at it from an odd point of view. And I started noticing certain trends. For example, this guy named Roger McBride, who was the Libertarian candidate for President of the United States in 1976. He's also the producer of Little House on the Prairie. He owned the rights to the book, the Little House by Laura Ingalls Wilder series. Roger, one time in Phoenix, Arizona, was asked, this guy basically got up, he was a liberal, and said to him, you know, I like a lot of what you're saying, but I don't like your stand on handgun controls. We got to get rid of these Saturday night specials. Surely, you know, they're only good for one thing, and that's killing people. Pretty tough question. Would you agree? And Roger looked at him, and he did something that was masterful. He said, how can you want to ban inexpensive handguns, the only means of self-protection poor blacks and women can afford? And at this point, the guy folded himself and sat back in the chair with a look of shock. Because usually when people defend the right to keep and bear arms, they talk about the right to self-defense, the right to keep and bear arms in the U.S., the Second Amendment, blah, blah, blah. And none of that would have connected with this dude. But you know what connected? The fact that Roger looked at him and said, these are the only kinds of handguns that blacks and poor women can afford. How can you support a racist, sexist proposal like that? He pushed this guy's buttons and this guy went, uh-oh, they're back. Now, I noticed the technique there. The technique was that Roger used left-wing reasons, motives, to explain a right-wing position. Or how about this? Liberal reasons to defend a, quote, conservative end. I know that's not true in Canada because your conservatives and liberals are both scum. I mean that with love and full respect, as befits them. Very little befits them. They're what's called odd sizes. Now, there's a phenomenon there where what you can do is you can use liberal reasons to defend economic positions that are free market, and free market reasons to defend liberal positions on civil liberties. And it's interesting, you can use right-wing reasons to defend left-wing conclusions, left-wing being social conclusions that happen to be pro-freedom, that happen to be pro-individual freedom. Or you can use left-wing reasons, liberal reasons, humane reasons to defend economic positions. If you read economists, and I would go everyone from Murray Rothbard to Walter Block to Ludwig von Mises to Israel Kirzner, all of the free market economists usually, now I underline the word usually, because they're coming around on this, usually defend their economic positions by economic reasoning. Well, if you look at these statistics, we've done an econometric curve which demonstrates the following conclusions. Data printout, data printout, data printout, and people, their eyes glaze over and they go, I'll agree with you, just quit, please don't do it no more. And that usually does not convince liberals. If you show them all the facts, what do the liberals go? They still look at you and say, don't you care about the poor? Don't you care? Don't you care? To which Mark goes, no. What about it? No, he doesn't do that. Unless he really wants to get their goat. That drives him crazy. Don't you care about the poor? No. That'll send a liberal home and get them guilty. Now, what's happening is that the argument is constructed a little differently when you do political cross-dressing. Now, the word cross-dressing refers to men dressing up in ladies' clothes and vice versa. And I view it as, I'm not really critical of it. I think it's a little bit of a drag, but... Oh, come on, that was so obvious. That was so obvious, and you knew it was coming. I never told you it was pretty. Now, let's do it again. Let's try it funny now. Now, actually, I think that's really a drag. Good, I like insincere laughter. It makes me feel at home. Now, that's what every marriage is. A marriage is the woman laughing at jokes that aren't funny that she's been told a dozen times before. Divorce is her saying, I ain't laughing no more. It's just a theory. If it fits, you know, plug it in. Now, cross-dressing, what you're doing is you're smuggling male body in female clothing, or female body in male clothing. What you do in political cross-dressing is you take ideas and you present them in ways that people don't expect. You give humane, decent, humanitarian reasons for your economic conclusions. Dig that? They're used to hearing humane, decent reasons for their statist, thug, big government programs. Is that right or not right? You're giving humane, decent, benevolent reasons for free market, degovernmentalized personal responsibility conclusions. And you're giving economic, rational, sensible reasons to defend your humane, decent civil liberties. Now, what happens are a few things. Number one is, you've got to remember that freedom has something for everyone. That's the reason you're able to do this. If freedom did not in fact produce humane ends, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. If it didn't in fact, you got to remember that freedom is not only good, it's efficient. Freedom is the best way of doing things. It's the fastest way. It's the cheapest way of doing things. But it's also the most benevolent, humane system ever devised. You want to know what's inhumane? Inhumane is a government stealing better than half your income that you work your ass off for. Inhumane is government taking money out of your pocket so you can't support your kids in a way that you'd like to. Inhumane is a government keeping you from once in your life getting that computer that you want in your home that you work so hard for. That's inhumane. Now, the reason we're able to do this, give humane reasons for economic conclusions or economic reasons for our humane positions, is freedom has something for everybody. Now, here's what happens in their mind. You're either wrong for the right reasons or right for the wrong reasons. But in any event, you're not the enemy. Don't people like to stereotype? Isn't that normal? Don't you like to, oh, that's a conservative position. That's a liberal position. Don't we like to do that? That's a socialist thug. That's a fascist position. That's a position I saw in The Joy of Sex. That's all, you know, you name the different positions. Oh, lighten up. I would never have broke my arm if it weren't for the misprint on page 37. You read it too. How did you keep from breaking it? Never mind, I don't need to know. What's interesting is that because your argument doesn't follow the standard lines, they can't stereotype you. They have to rethink it. What are you getting them to do? You're getting them to stop and think. Now, isn't it normal for us to make quick judgments, snap judgments? You read the paper, you know what side they're on. They're liberal. They're conservative. They're socialist. They're beyond socialist. They're this, they're that. That's a feminist position. That's a skinhead position. Yeah, that's this position, that's that position. Don't we make snap judgments and don't we pigeonhole people? True or not true? I knew you'd say that because I had you all pigeonholed before I came in. But then you knew I'd say that because you had me pigeonholed as doing that. We do it all the time. It's very normal, it's very natural. Ashley Montague used to call this hardening of the categories. And he's correct. Because it is very normal and natural for us to stereotype and begin trying to put it in our little pigeonholes. Now, when you present your views in these new ways, in political cross-dressing, you're able to prevent them from pigeonholing. Well, it doesn't fit in fish and it doesn't fit in fowl. What the hell is it? Now what do you have to do? They have to back up and go, well, if it's not this and it's not that, what is it? Have you ever had people do that to you politically? I know, as I understand, you were asked the question, are you left wing or right wing? Is that correct during a campaign? And what was your answer, sir? No, that wasn't the answer you gave. What was the answer?
You said I'm for freedom. I was there.
Oh,
They said, well, what are you, left wing or right wing? And he says, we're for freedom of choice. Now, they still have no more success in pigeonholing him, but he got his answer out. He basically said, I don't fit into your hole. I don't fit into one of your positions. Now, by presenting your beliefs in this way, using this technique, you prevent them from pigeonholing you. And you know what they do? They stop and they look again. Well, I haven't considered this then. Now they have to reconsider the issue. Wouldn't you like them to reconsider an issue that you want them to reconsider? Do you want them to keep on stereotyping? You're preventing them from falling into the mistake of continually repeating their past mistakes. See what an opportunity to grow you're giving these people? You realize you're doing psychotherapy every day when you communicate politically this way. Now, let me give you some more examples so you can fill in the gaps. How about legalizing drugs? That's always a hard one for most people. I've had people run that by me when I'm on radio talk shows. Hey, we've got to keep these drugs illegal. Look what's happening in the schools. And I always do the obvious. I say, we've got to take the high profits out of pushing drugs on our children.
You're right.
I want to make sure that people who want to give harmful drugs to our kids don't have a lot of good reasons to do it. I'm tired of kids making $1,000 a day dealing death, aren't you? If you take the profits out of it, these people will go look for honest work. Just like Frank Nitty's and Al Capone's people looked for honest work when Prohibition ended. I care about our kids. All of a sudden they go, wait a minute, excuse me, you didn't give me the position they should be able to use drugs because it's their body, and if they die, so what? That's usually the position. If you're going to defend it, or you argue on civil freedom kind of point of view. Most everybody, however, is against drugs, right? I mean, in the States it gets really stupid. Just say no to drugs, you know.
We'll get that up here too.
Just, and they go through these long commercials. Cocaine is so good you shouldn't even try it once. You know, that's a real great argument. You know, tell your 13-year-old daughter sex is so good you shouldn't even try it once. And see how late she stays out. Don't let Mark give her a ride home, though. Now, yes.
Well, I just wanted to ask if I could interrupt you because you tell about a commercial I saw on Canadian television like a couple of weeks ago. It just killed me, cracked me up. I don't know if this scared anybody out drug use, but it was a funny thing. And you saw this couple, this really brave, serious-minded young woman before the doctor, and he's saying really grim off-camera, I'm sorry, they'll never be able to have children. And you're he was crying, guys, you're devastated. And then that scene fades, and up from the words, marijuana reduces your sperm count. You know, think about it. And I sat flabbergasted. I said, wow, there's an anti-drug push I never heard.
I gotta hear the new argument. Bob, I'm 4 days late on my period. Hey, I'm sorry, marijuana's reduced my sperm count. That'll be a hell of an argument, guys. I saw it on TV. It's not my baby. God, what an argument. Anyway, yes?
I just have another little aside and experience with the drug issue. Quote, when I went to Detroit a couple weeks ago to drop Danielle off at the airport there, you come up through customs and there's a sticker underneath the customs officer and it says, drugs are America's #1 problem. I didn't pay any, I read it, I looked at it, and said to Danielle, that's a weird thing to see. I'd never seen it at the border before. So I asked the customs officer, I said, I need a map so I can find my way to Detroit. He said, well, just go to the customs free shop over there. They've got maps there. So I went into the customs free shop. They had no maps there. They had nothing there. They had two things there, alcohol and tobacco. That was all you could get at the duty free shop. Right on the other side of the customs border where it says drugs are America's #1 problem.
Every time I start worrying about the drug problem, I get drunk. God, that's scary. Now, all right. Political cross-dressing consists in giving efficiency, free market, cheap reasons in defense of humane positions. We want to take the high profits out of pushing drugs. That's an economic reason for calling for drug. By the way, try this. Don't call it drug legalization. Call it re-legalization. They used to be legal, you know, in Canada. What we want to do is we want to re-legalize drugs. Drives them a little nuts. They were legal prior to 1909, I believe, in Canada, and 1913 in the States.
So I know that stuff.
What?
I don't know why. Can I tell that story? That was never actually meant to prevent drugs from being around. It was only to actually punish the Orientals on the West Coast.
Of course.
Because they were trying to do anything they could to discourage them from coming here because they were much more competitive than the white neighbors. In fact, they were murdered and burned out and
It's terrible.
constantly ravaged by white unionized workers and just white workers generally because of their competitiveness. And the Orientals brought opium with them and other marijuana derivatives. And what happened is that the government figured this would be a way of persecuting them because if you could trump up some reason to put them in jail, they couldn't work. So by making opium and marijuana illegal, they knew they could round up a lot of Orientals who tended to use it, so they take them out of the workforce and create more jobs for them. And that's the origin of that law.
Interesting. You had a point.
I had a lot of people who don't buy the fact that if you legalize drugs or whatever, they can take the profits out of it. You just take it.
Oh, no.
They say that the money's still there, you're going to make $1,000 a day. It's still going to be violent. The only thing that's different is that the law's going to be taken out of the book.
Well, what's interesting, let's skip the argument for a second because I'm trying to teach a specific technique, but let me point this out. Number one, it's very important to know what people are or are not buying into also, whether it's true. I would point out the obvious. I say, look, when was the last time you heard about a shooting because a kid was trying to sell a six-pack of Coors at junior high? You know, how often do you have people on street corners, psst, hey buddy, I got some Seagrams for you? That happened in Prohibition. And matter of fact, I recommend the book Ceremonial Chemistry, which is now back in print. And they talk a lot. Do you have a copy of that at Freedom Party headquarters? By Thomas Zaz. Please get a copy of it. They go into the history of drugs and alcohol. For example, how many, Thomas Zaz, S-Z-A-S-Z. It's called Ceremonial Chemistry. Now, interesting fact from the book, and then I want to get back to the technique. How many and I want to be real specific, how many drug-caused deaths, and we're just talking about cocaine, marijuana, heroin at this point, we're not talking about alcohol and tobacco. How many drug-caused deaths were there last year in Canada? Do you know?
Very small, under 100.
Right. That's why they use phrases like drug-related. Well, he was on his way to purchase drugs and his friend shot him to take his money. That's drug-related. Let me give you a point of reference. In the United States, it was under 400. Big drug problem. Under 400 people actually died from the drugs. And it wasn't from the drugs. It was because they were tainted. You didn't know the quality of the drugs they were getting. Do you know, during Prohibition, how many people died by alcohol-caused deaths?
Oh, in New York City alone, over
10,000. 10,000 people a year were the official numbers. That's according to Thomas Zaz. Okay? And he quotes the government statistics. Now, at the time, this is during the 30s, in the U.S., we had a population half of what we have today. So that would be like 20,000 people a year died by alcohol-caused deaths in comparison to under 400 from drugs. Drugs are not nearly as dangerous, even tainted drugs, as tainted alcohol was. Just want you to have a point of reference. Now, however, I don't want to get away from the specific technique. Now, we're talking about a specific... Yes, sir?
Well, what do you think about your president? Don't just eat a little bit of cookie?
Yeah, I do. You know, I think George Bush is probably the best case I can think of for having a vasectomy very young. Hey, you take a look at him. Would you like to admit he was your friend? Well, my name is George. The old Gipper's out and gone now, and I'm here, and I'm going to stay the course on whatever policies I can remember. But God, I'm a good grandfather. What an idiot. You know, let me explain something about George Bush. If George Bush were the angel of death, death would cease to be a tragedy and be a nuisance. Now, all right, now this technique, let's go back to this. Political cross-dressing is a very specific technique. Whenever I am arguing an economic position, I almost always go for humane reasons. When I talk about minimum wage, I talk about the humane reasons for abolishing minimum wage. The poor black kid that can't get a job. The racist who now has an excuse to not hire the black kid. I didn't like him anyway. I got to pay him the same as a white kid? Fuck him. I'll hire the white kid. That, in fact, happens when you have minimum wage laws. Black kids get fired by the bigots because now bigotry is okay. When I'm talking about a civil liberties position, whether it's freedom of speech, whether it's freedom to determine who you're going to have sex with or what you're going to place in your body or who you're going to associate with, I usually, and I'm just saying with this technique, I'm not arguing this is the only way you do it. Remember, this is only one tool. This is a ratchet wrench. We can use a screwdriver when we want to. I usually go for the humane reasons for the economic stuff and the economic reasons for the humane stuff, or the civil freedom stuff. Now, you can do it, there's some spin-offs on it. If you're talking with feminists, for example, and I know Mark doesn't like to talk to feminists, he likes to talk at them, because he views them as beyond redemption. And since most of them are women in comfortable shoes, I tend to agree. Oh, I'm teasing, I'm just talking about up here. In the US, we got a really interesting group of feminists. We're trying to export them to Canada. Would you guys like to engage in a little free trade? You send us gay men and we'll send you the National Organization for Women. We got a deal? Oh, come on, you guys know we'd get the better of it again. Anyway, you can, when you're discussing feminist, if you're discussing an economic position, there's no reason why when discussing it with women or on behalf of feminist issues, you can't give feminist humane reasons for them. For example, minimum wage is one of the primary barriers to women re-entering the labor force getting a job. Did you know that? That's why a lot of women work at home, the so-called cottage sweatshops. Have you heard that phrase? That's a new one in the States. Wait, you guys will get it. Whenever we come up with a particularly stupid phrase, Canada gets it, and they make it law before we do, but we get the word first. Well, it's true. I mean, you got Pierre Trudeau, and all we got was Margaret, you know. I still think, you know, look at it, you know, we got the style and you got the substance. That's the way life works. That's equally true with environment. When you're discussing the environment, if you want to talk about, let's look at the efficiency reasons, private property reasons for protecting the environment. Do you see that? You don't give normal environmental reasoning. What you're doing is chunking up the argument into two parts, the conclusions and the reasons. Now, the reason this works, the reason you're able to use this technique is not because you're a deceitful, lying slimeball. The reason you're able to do this is because the free market is the greatest problem solver ever invented. The free market makes possible solutions to the environment, to sexual concerns, to civil liberties, to personal freedoms, to people having jobs, to people earning good livings. The free market provides the opportunity for these to be solved. And it's the best problem solver ever devised. What's more is the free market is the most humane, benevolent system ever devised. If you didn't work during the Middle Ages, they killed you. If you don't work in the United States or Canada today, you can still panhandle and get enough to eat. People actually will help you even if you don't deserve it, which escapes me, but that's the way people are. So in fact, this particular technique you can use on environmentalists. Take a look. For example, what do environmentalists really want? Now, I'm not talking about your status thug environmentalists. In terms of goals, what outcome do they want? Mark?
They want to balance ecology where industry and the natural ecology cooperate rather than are mutually self-destructive.
That's right. They want air we can see through. They want water we can drink. They want an environment that it doesn't endanger human beings or animals. What's wrong with those goals? Are those reasonable goals? Take a look at the Fountainhead. Has everybody here read the Fountainhead? Who has? Raise your hand. Remember Howard Rourke's development out in the woods? He doesn't strip mine the place and slap up houses. He builds it around the environment. Almost everything he designed integrated into the environment. He was an environmentalist architect. A phrase that would have driven Rand crazy if I ever used it, but it's true. It's really true. How about feminists? Let's talk about the goals. Now, there are some stupid feminist goals. I'll agree with that. I concede that right off the bat.
Call them female dominant.
Female dominant. But I'm into that, though. Ow. I like dominant female. I like strong women. I even like weightlifting women. I like those women. God, bench press me. What? No, it's not. I've seen the workouts and participated in a couple myself. Now, suppose you've got feminists. What are some of the goals that feminists have that are very reasonable?
Eliminating the stereotypes that limit people's expression of who they are.
Okay? You don't want to be stereotyped as you're a woman and therefore blah, blah, blah. Yes, sir?
systematic discrimination of women in the industry, that is like guilt and conditioning that makes it inevitable that men would in fact discriminate against them because of the conditioning they've had for the previous, the previous 20 years.
Okay. How about they want physical safety? They don't want to be raped on the way home from work. They don't want to be sexually harassed on the job. I don't know if there are women here who have been sexually harassed on the job. Guys think it's a joke, but I got to tell you, I've dated someone who've been sexually harassed on the job, and it's not a joke. The idea that your job is at the mercy of whether or not you sleep with someone or whether you let them fondle you is wrong.
My employees don't object.
How about
Well, no, excuse me, but that's a selective mechanism. They chose to go there. They knew what they were getting into. Sort of like people who knowingly involve themselves in accidents. Yes.
okay? Is something that it seems women understand and most men don't. I have had men tell me rape jokes
Yes.
and do not have the foggiest notion why my reaction instead of to laugh is to pick up a heavy object and threaten their lives. They have no conception, and there are some things that are very important to women that are not as important to men.
Sure.
And feminism should address the issue of equal not having to be the same, but a person having a right to their perceptions.
Sure.
Really respect, but also
Yeah.
Sure, respect for your right to know what you know and see what you see and be who you are. All right, now, but check this out. These are reasonable goals. There's nothing wrong with those. There's no conflict between those specific goals and a free society, is there? Do you see a conflict? The conflict is when you get government into the problem. The conflict is when you do that. I'll tell you the difference between a Freedom Party member, a liberal, and a conservative. It's real straightforward. They all see the same problem. Let's say poverty. And the liberal says, poverty. How can government solve the problem? And the Freedom Party member says, poverty. How did government cause the problem? And how does government keep making it worse? And the conservative says, what problem? We've always had the poor with us. There's a certain callousness among many conservatives, just tough, too bad. If you're poor, that's the way it is. I got mine, Jack. Hit the bricks. And there is that. If you check it out, tell me that isn't a perception. Now, back to black activism. Let's call it racial minorities. Racial minorities, in terms of goals, qua racial minority, whether you're Hispanic or black or whether you're Oriental, you usually want the same things for yourself that everybody else wants. You want to basically be safe. You basically want to be able to get a good job, take care of your family. There is no conflict between that and liberty and freedom. So it seems very reasonable that there should be good freedom arguments in favor of those positions or in defense of those positions, or that protect and sanction those. How about the elderly? So do you guys have a big lobby like we do in the United States about the old people? Do they get together and vote in large numbers and make sure that people vote their way? Is that done up here?
It started with when they started talking about de-indexing the pensions. That was the first time I noticed a large gray movement.
Yeah, in the United States, we've got geriatric fascists. They get older people, it's worse than that. Older people tend to vote in larger numbers and higher percentages than any other demographic group in any country. That's a fact. Now, the reason is probably they've got the time to go over and vote. The shuffleboard is shut down or, being reglossed. They do have a lot of free time, and other people are in fact working. And you got to remember, it takes time to go vote. It's not just that, I guess I'll stop in and vote. You have to stand in line, you have to make sure you're registered, and so you find that older people tend to vote in larger numbers. What's more is, the studies are pretty consistent. Older people tend to vote for more government, consistently. Consistently vote for more government. Why do they do that? Because they view government as the source of their solutions. They're looking to government for solutions to their problems. And what we have to do is generate free market, individualistic solutions to problems of the elderly. And they're there because the free market is better for the elderly than any other institution. How would you like to think that your grandfather's health care is in the final analysis in the hands of OHIP? It is. Scary, huh? Do you think their interests and yours are the same in terms of your grandfather's well-being? Probably not. If he requires very expensive care, they're going to have to make a decision about whether it's in the budget or not, aren't they? But if you're paying the bill, then you get to say how far the medical care goes. Or if need be, borrow. Now, teachers are another group that need to be addressed by advocates of freedom. Think about why people go into teaching. It's not because 7-Eleven was all full up with employees. Usually they're really concerned about teaching. They like kids. They want to teach. I've seen that occur again and again. Now, of course, you've got your professional parasites in all businesses, and I'm not going to be unique and say there aren't any teachers that way. I know we've got deadbeats in every profession. Some professions have 1 or 2 live beats. We need to realize that each of these groups that is going to government and asking for being bailed out, asking for programs, is basically, when all is said and done, what they're saying is, I have a problem, can you solve it? Is that not why they're going to government? They're asking them to solve the problem. Do you agree or disagree? Okay.
I disagree.
Disagree. Okay.
We go to the various reasons first.
Okay.
What they're doing is asking for a special privilege or a handout.
Yeah, I don't think it's reactive at all. I think they're actually advancing interests
Oh.
that haven't even been threatened.
Oh, you're correct. You're correct. As a matter of fact, I agree that a lot of groups aggressively seek to continually expand what they're getting. It's not, we've got a problem, fix it. It's like, we've got a desire, fulfill it. I agree with you. I think you're correct there. But what they're doing is they're going to government to get a solution to their problem or get a meeting of their desires, someone to fulfill their desires. Now, the free market can, in many of these cases, though not all, the free market will not give a power luster more power. The free market will not enable people to trample on other people's lives. So people that have those motives cannot be satisfied in a free market unless they can find people that will sign on board. I guess you could. You could be a Hare Krishna free market, couldn't you? Hello, how are you doing? Give you a reminder at the door. Have a bowl of rice. You could do that, I guess. But by and large, most people approach government because government offers a solution to their problem, or they ask government to solve the problem or fulfill their needs. Political cross-dressing, as a technique, enables you to use right-wing reasons for left-wing, social, humanitarian, free market positions, and use free market reasons for humane, benevolent positions, such as protecting the rights of minority to read what they like, censored literature, and so on and so on. The reason it works is because you're either right for the wrong reason or wrong for the right reason. In either event, you're not the enemy. Now, I've had people generate time and time and time again different arguments that enable us to shatter people's stereotypes of what defending a position is. Minimum wage law for years used to be defended on the grounds that it dislocates capital and does weird stuff that only an economist would give a flying leap for. In fact, as soon as economists started talking about minimum wage throwing black kids out of work, people started listening to it. People like Thomas Sowell in the United States, people like Walter Williams in the US, people like Milton Friedman, when they started looking at the impact on the people it was alleged to be helping, that's when people started listening to our position. That's why in the United States we've held the line on minimum wage. And you know the outcome is that more black kids have jobs. And that's why we've been able to do the same thing on weapons. You know, it never fails to amaze me. Your government now wants to put a ban on semi-automatic weapons, except for the police. If there's anybody I don't want to have a semi-automatic weapon, it's the police. I would rather the drug dealers have it than the police. But that's just a personal opinion because the drug dealers don't pull me over when I'm walking at 3 in the morning in a neighborhood. And they rarely bother me. I don't like the idea of one group of people having guns. That's what Hitler had. That's what Idi Amin had in Uganda. Remember seeing the old photos of Idi Amin walking down the street and waving? And people said, whoa, his people really love him. They hated his guts, but nobody had guns. They had gun control there.
But that can't happen in Canada.
Oh, of course it can't happen here. This is different.
It already actually happens. You know, the police have committed 89 murders in the last 15 years, and not one police officer has ever been convicted for all wrongful deaths. It's a complete flaw.
SWAT team blew away a farmer one night. He heard somebody moving around his yard, got his shotgun, walked out, and the police blew him away.
While on his own property.
Wrong address.
Well, just a minute. I want you to know that all these victims had it done to them for their own good. We've got to defend the government. Now, yes?
I've been in a discussion with people who support gun control, and they often use the example in Britain where police don't just carry sticks and not guns. So how do you feel back with the response to that?
Well, unfortunately, my reaction is that in the United States, guns in the U.S. and in Canada, probably weapons are so widespread you're never going to get rid of them. But I always give the counterexample like this. Let's say, do you know what police response time, or you know what the phrase response time, that means how long it takes them from the call till they show at the door? Do you know what police response time is in Harlem?
Yeah, it's like
Daybreak. What do you do if you're a black woman on welfare and a man that you've had sex with or wants to have sex with you is kicking in your door at 3 in the morning?
Yell fire, actually.
Yell fire. That's actually the best thing to yell. You're correct. You're correct, because if you yell rape, nobody comes. But the fact is, this woman doesn't have a means of self-defense. The man usually has 60% more musculature than the woman. He's usually physically bigger, physically heavier, and able to bludgeon the woman. You got to remember that God made all men, but Colonel Colt made them equal. I think that handguns are probably a woman's best friend. Matter of fact, the National Organization for Women in the States stopped using their anti-handgun arguments when a lot of feminists told them that their only safety and their only protection from rape was the fact that they could pull that pistol out and rearrange someone's anatomy for them. I like that. I think it was wonderful. But you would have to get into a whole bunch of different things. Probably the best book on it's by Don Cates called Discussing Handguns. He's a liberal who actually comes out against handgun control. Yes, sir?
Have you ever seen the bumper sticker when guns are outlawed, when the outlaws will have guns?
Yes. Actually, I had another bumper sticker that said, when guns are outlawed, how will we shoot the liberals? So, though it was real popular, I sold the shit out of those to conservatives. And then I left them on their cars. I guess a lot of people had flat tires, but I didn't have one on my car. Yes. Oh, you remember my story, you know? In Orlando. The famous Orlando story. I'll tell you a story. I used to tell a story in my workshops, and you reminded me of it. Thank you. What happened was there was during the 70s, the famous Orlando rape crisis. This occurred. The rate of rapes went way the hell up in Orlando, Florida. And women just finally got fed up with the fact that cops didn't do a damn thing. So spontaneously, without organizing, they started going down to the local pistol shop and rifle shop and said, I'd like a pistol. What kind? I don't know, a 38, a 37? Is it a D or an A? I don't know. I'm not a pistol owner. What kind of bullet? This bullet fell through. It's the wrong one. They didn't know anything about weapons, and they were so scared, they were so terrified that they could not walk the streets, even at dusk. I'm not talking about midnight. The women were going out and buying pistols they didn't know how to use. One day, one of the gun store owners said to him, what are you ladies doing? He said, well, we're not going to put up with this shit anymore. And he asked a buddy of his who was a cop, would you be willing as a service to teach these women to use pistols? And, you know, for their own safety as well as the safety of the community at large. And the cop thought it was cool, and what happened was they had a pistol training out at one of these pistol ranges, and some newspaper found out about it, and I love this story. And I remember seeing the picture. I used to take it to workshops. Did I ever show you guys a picture of the women?
I get the article.
It had like 60 women, and you could see all their pistols in line here. You see it from the side. And the title to the article and the photo was, "No More Rapes in Orlando, Say Women." What was interesting was the morning after the article came out, and I mean like 3 in the morning, an alleged rapist allegedly broke a window and allegedly stepped into an alleged bedroom of one of these alleged pistol-wielding mamas. She allegedly pulled the gun and said, if you move, I'll blow your balls off. That was the phrase that was pointed. Unfortunately, he did not read the paper and did not believe her because he knew that women didn't know how to pull the pistol. They couldn't throw a softball. How could they pull the trigger? She put 3 bullet holes in his head, nice spread. This poor woman, you know how women get hysterical, right? Everybody knows women get hysterical. This poor hysterical woman forgot to call the police. She called the newspaper instead. And this newspaper came over. This is awful. This is awful. Could you hold the pistol up? That day, there was a photo of the woman, the blood, the guy laying on the alleged rapist, allegedly dying on the alleged floor. Follow-up. They tried to get a grand jury to indict the woman on the grounds that, I don't know, she hadn't given a Miranda warning to the asshole or something. I don't know what she didn't do. And you know what the grand jury did? The grand jury refused to call an indictment. 0 people would indict her. They called a second grand jury. Guess what they did? Same thing. Fuck you, we're not indicting her. Turned out this guy, right, that they wanted to indict the woman for shooting, right, instead of properly restraining. I thought it was proper restraint.
It worked.
It worked. What happened was this guy had been arrested 11 times for rape, had been indicted twice and never convicted, because when a rape trial occurs, the woman's on trial, the man isn't. Her whole sexual history is on trial. I thought this was amazingly amusing, but there's a follow-up. It seems that 2 weeks later, some other guy who was illiterate, another victim of the public schools, didn't read the article, and he busted in on another woman. Wrong woman. This woman was a really good shot, put a spread of about 4 bullets right in the chestal area. Another hysterical woman, you know how women get hysterical? You know, they forget to do things. She called the newspaper. She forget to call the police. And they came over and said, this is terrible. This is terrible. Smile. Hold the pistol up.
You might have called the newspaper on purpose.
What's interesting? You're kidding! I'm shocked you would suggest such a thing. And they played it up. For the next year, there was not one reported rape in Orlando, Florida.
But the cemeteries were busy, right?
And I guess there were a lot of rapists into date counseling. And what happened was the following year, the rape of rates was significantly down.
The rape of rates?
Yeah, the rate of rape. You knew what I meant. Oh, no, there's more. I told this story to the National Organization for Women in Tucson, Arizona, that didn't know this story. Because these weren't feminists. These were housewives, whatever the hell that might be. I'm married to the house, you know. My husband just comes every so often, you know. I don't know. And comes here. I wasn't getting dirty. That would have been Mark. He would have been dirty. I wouldn't have been dirty. Okay, now, what happened was I told this story at a National Organization for Women meeting in Tucson, Arizona. And after I gave it, I got real interesting applause, and a lot of the women thought that was really cool. One of the women, who was wearing blue jeans and wore sort of one of these lumberjack shirts, you know, with the rolled up arms, looked like she could do a Marlboro commercial, you know. She was actually a pretty good looking lady. She says, come here, I want to talk to you. So we walked in the back of the room. She says, I want to show you something. She started inching her shirt up, and I thought, hey, lucky me, I'm going to score. You know, well, I immediately went in the gutter. And she pulled out a .357 and she said, see this? And I said, uh-huh. And she says, I want to tell you a story. I said, go ahead. So you got to remember, an armed society is a polite society. And so she said, I was hitchhiking along 22nd Street, and that's one of the main drags in Tucson, Arizona. Right? I was hitchhiking. She didn't own a car. And I was hitchhiking, and this guy picked me up and to give me a ride. And she said, I need to be dropped off at Swan, which is a cross street. And the guy kept driving. She said, excuse me, you missed my cross street. And he said, shut up, bitch, was the phrase that she told me he said. And so she sort of smiled and reached into her pants and took the pistol out. And it was double action, which means you cock the hammer and put it against his head and said, pull over. Safe driving school paid off with this man. He pulled over. He wasn't buckled in. She said, get out of the car. He got out of the car and she slid behind the wheel. She said, keep walking. And he walked a little further. She says, start running. I'll give you a head start before I start shooting, asshole. I said, how fast was he? She said, he was like Jesse Owens. He was gone. And I said, then what happened? She said, well, I disabled the car. I broke his key off in the ignition. And I flattened the tires. And I took his registration so that I knew where he lived. just in case anything happened.
Meanwhile, he's
And-
all his friends down the bar, some mad feminist.
And I said, that's a really interesting story. Would you tell that to your sisters here at the National Organization for Women? She said, sure. And I was running for Congress at the time, and I said, would you do me one more favor? She said, what's that? I said, would you vote for me? She said, shit, I'll vote for you. You're okay. I went,
For a man, probably.
for a man, well, she probably, yeah, I'm pretty sure she meant that. You know, you're not bad for a nigger boy, you know. It's what a hell of a compliment. So she got up and she told her story. And then she said, look, you guys, there's nobody, Democrat or Republican, who's going to give us a hand. Vote for Emerling. He's the only guy who's worth a shit on this issue. He's the only one who's standing up for women. And I ended up getting a high percentage of the National Organization for Women vote in the area. And it pleased me because they recognized that gun control was a woman's issue, as well as an issue of the Constitution. Anybody here see the movie Roots? TV show? Remember the last episode when the blacks finally started getting off the plantation? Do you notice anything interesting there? They got weapons. It was only when they started getting rifles and pistols that they rebelled. Why do you think it was a death penalty for a black man to have a weapon in his possession in the South? Click. You see, political cross-dressing lets you give gay reasons for a free market for gay men, and lets you give lesbian reasons for a free market or for civil liberties. It lets you give environmental reasons for producing private property rights. It lets you give private property reasons for defending the environment. You're either right for the wrong reasons or wrong for the right reasons. In any event, you're not the enemy. And what happens to people when you use this approach? You begin seeing light bulbs go on in their head. And they begin reconsidering the issue. And I'll tell you, it's really true that people will reconsider the issue when you talk in their terms and you show them how, from their own viewpoint, this is a sensible, plausible, consistent position.
Well, yeah, I think that's probably how you should always communicate with all people you are not in complete agreement with. You switch positions with them, pretend you're them, and if you were them, what is it you'd like to hear from someone? I mean, obviously a compassionate, reasoned approach, but sympathetic to what you're already thinking.
Oh, yeah.
The intention is not to convince them that you're right and they're wrong, but in fact, what they want to achieve can best be achieved through the free market. And so you really don't want to change their ideals, just the methodology by which they arrive at those ideals.
Very good. Now, if you want to get a little more detail in how to go about setting up a cross-dressed argument, I talk about that in the Essence of Political Persuasion tapes. Now, it's about time for lunch, if I'm correct. Thank God, it is time for lunch. What we're going to do, all right, everybody look at their watches, because when we come back, what are we going to do when we come back? I don't know what I'm on. What point am I on? Well, I have to look at my sheet just like you do. Oh, we're going to do the value X-ray, 5 unconventional techniques, and then we're going to get into mind focus. And if you want to blow somebody's mind, you'll find all of these very useful. Let's come back at 1:35. Can we agree? Can you agree to get back here by then?
The only restaurant,
Close enough. A Carnegie approach.
the only restaurant that's open right now that I'd recommend is
I'm here now.
Yeah, I hate people that throw my stuff back at me. Okay.
Hey,
Are we
honor
all
your
ready?
father and your mother.
What?
Honor your father and your mother.
The most honorable thing I can do is kill myself right now and put an end to it. No, actually, I'm just teasing. Every child should live long enough to be a disgrace to his own parents. It's very important. And every parent should live long enough to spoil his grandchildren. That's a very important. That's an important function of a parent. Now, we're going to do 2 sections. We're going to do unconventional approaches. We're going to do 3 or 4 of these. Actually, did I say 5 unconventional approaches? Was that what it was called? I have more than 5, but I'm going to limit it to 5 just because I want to. Another whim being worshipped. You've got to remember, if you're going to be an objectivist, you must worship at the whim of your choice. This is freedom of expression in the whim department. Now, Uh-oh. Do we want to share it with everybody?
This is a lot like school. Sorry.
I've always wanted to do that. I never got an opportunity. I feel much better now that I've demeaned and degraded a fellow human being. Makes me feel so much better about myself. Attempted to.
Nice try.
Isn't that spoken just like a feminist? Actually, there's a cruel story that Saul Alinsky during the 1960s was giving a talk at University of California at Berkeley. And the Black Panthers at the time were rather noisy. And he presented some things that he thought needed to be done about civil rights activism. And one of the blacks stood up and said, "Excuse me, is that the honky position?" And Saul looks at him, and Saul was a great social activist, and he was good with the anti-war movement and civil rights. And he said, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "I said, cracker, is that the honky position?" And Alinsky looks at him and he says, "That depends. Is that a nigger question?" And this guy goes, "What'd you say?" And I said, and Alinsky walks over and he says, "I said, is that a nigger question?" And this guy looks at him and he says, "I'll make you a deal. I'll pretend you're not a nigger and you pretend I'm not a honky. And we'll pretend we're just human beings talking to each other. Is that all right with you?" And the audience loved it, right? And this asshole sat down where he belonged, and so Alinsky went back to talking. So, that, you reminded me of that when you made your comment regarding feminism, but it didn't have anything to do with you, and it's no comment on you. You just reminded me of it. It's all random in here. It's not organized. It's chaos. This is anarchy internally. Now, the unconventional techniques. I have a friend, Ed Clark. Does anybody here know Ed Clark? You guys know Ed Clark? He's the antitrust attorney for Atlantic Richfield Oil Company. And he was a candidate for president in 1980. And Ed used to have a great technique for dealing with issues that he didn't want to talk about. And I want to give you this, such a simple technique. You're at a public gathering, you're on a radio talk show, you're on TV, and you ask a question that has nothing to do with what you're talking about. Let us say you're talking about rent control. Let us say you're talking about Sunday closings. And someone decides that they want to humiliate you. That's always a fun thing to do to the freedom advocate. I've got an idea. Let's tease the junkyard dog. I've got a better idea. Let's go tease Mark Emerling. Well, that's a big mistake because Mark hits back. What Ed Clark would always do is, for example, let's say you were talking about Sunday closings. Okay? Someone comes up to you and said, "Excuse me, but doesn't your party advocate legalizing drugs?" It has nothing to do with Sunday closings unless you're selling drugs on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, right? Right? I mean, we can agree on that. Ed had a technique which is especially useful. Now, you never lie about your position. It's not a good idea to lie. The next thing, after lying, you stoop to just God knows terrible things. You don't footnote people to give you ideas. It's just downhill from there. Ed gives a very simple answer to questions like that. Don't you Freedom Party people advocate legalizing drugs? Yes, but the question today is on Sunday closings. Let's talk about that. He just gives them a very brief answer. Yes, but the issue today is. You know what happens if they're on TV or on radio? You haven't given them enough to put a mic bite on. They need 20 seconds worth of material to quote you.
They can still say that off camera.
Of course they can. Of course they can. If you're dealing with people that want to get you, they'll get you. All right, if they want to make you look bad, they will. But I want to recommend this to you. If someone asks you a question that is not germane to what you're doing, but in fact you do or don't believe, give a brief answer. That's yes, but the question facing us today is, and then you talk about what is your issue. Very simple, isn't it? So simple you're going to forget it, aren't you? Obvious, isn't it? Write it down. Now, here's a technique that I want to give you, which is a very simple technique. If you want to try out a new argument or try a new approach to convincing somebody, one that you have not tried before, here's a technique that I love using. It's called quotes. In quotes, you don't use the argument. You quote someone who used an argument. For example, let's say I want to present an idea to you that I don't know if it'll work. I was talking to this guy the other day who's got this bookstore up in London, Ontario. His name's Mark Emerling. And the other day, Mark said to me, he said, we need to legalize drugs. We need to take the high profits out of pushing drugs to school kids. How about that? However they respond to it, they're not responding to me, and they know they're not. They're responding to Mark, who isn't there to defend himself. Now, what's interesting about quoting someone else and saying what you want to say, using them to say what you want to say, is it distances you from the criticism. It eliminates that interpersonal antagonism. You can use that to criticize your boss. I used to do it with my boss. You want to have a little fun with your boss? Give him an opportunity to grow as a person in his humanity. Give him a chance to adapt to new environmental conditions. Tell him the following. You ready for this? The other day I was at this workshop with a strange guy from Las Vegas. And he said that if I came up to you and said, "You're nuts," that you'd react badly. What do you think?
What kind of odds did he give you?
And what's interesting is your boss will criticize me, who ain't there, and you just got a chance to tell your boss he's nuts, which you knew and he didn't. Now, with quotes, you can quote anybody saying anything. If you quote someone, now I want to make it clear, I'm not talking about footnotes. I'm talking about acting as though someone were there. For example, I talked to Robert Metz the other day. Robert and I were discussing this important issue. And Robert looked at me and said, "Michael, you don't listen." Isn't that amazing? Now, if you want to tell someone you're talking to you don't listen, try using quotes. I was talking to Michael Emerling the other day, and you know what he said to me? He looked me right in the eye and said, "Why don't you listen to me?" And then smile at him. Now, you just told him he didn't listen to you, and his subconscious gets it. Right? But he can't blame you. You didn't say it. Michael said it. You just quoted Michael. Does that sound too simple? Does it sound too sneaky and devious? It works on a subconscious level. In fact, Milton Erickson, who used to be the world's most renowned hypnotherapist, used to use an induction technique that consisted in stacking quotes. He'd quote within a quote within a quote. You know, the other day I was talking to Mark Emery, and he said to me, "Michael, I have a friend named Robert Metz." And Robert told me this story about his friend Brenda. And Brenda one day was talking to her mother, and you know what her mother said? Her mother looked her right in the eye and said, "Hey, why don't you pay more attention to me?" How about that? Now, who was talking? You don't know. I've just quoted a person, quoted a person, quoted a person, quoted a person. But what's interesting is the message contained within the quotes sinks in. You want to test me out? Try this with your kids. I'll give you an experiment that you can test what I'm telling you right now. You don't have to believe me. I don't want you to believe me, but here's how to test it. Tell your kids the following story. Whatever your child's name is, blank. That's always a good name, blank. Fill in the blank. Blank, the other day, I went to a seminar that was held by a guy named Michael. And he looked at me, and he told me a story about a friend of his who had a giraffe. And this was a very special giraffe. It was a chalking giraffe. And Michael said that one day the giraffe looked at him and said, "Hey, you know, I really love you because I love little boys and little girls. And I want you to know that." Isn't that an interesting story about a giraffe? Here's your test. See if your kid hugs you.
Or says, "You're irrational, Dad."
Yeah. Excuse me, that doesn't sound cognitively appropriate. According to Leon Festinger, you know, that won't work. And When Prophecy Fails on page 57, for example, in Mark's going, "What is this child reading during the day?" All right. Now, what you can do is you quote whoever says what you want to say to this person. Okay? So it's not you saying it. It's that other guy. I was talking to Robert Metz, and Robert said if I looked you in the eye, Robert said, "Hey, pay a lot of attention because this is a great idea." How about that idea, Roberts? They respond to the quote. They acknowledge the fact that it came not from you but from the other person, and they don't lay any responsibility on you. This is another responsibility avoidance technique to enable other people to be more responsible. Yes, Mark?
Well, you've always pointed out that these are very social people, but somehow it
But.
creates this inundation.
Where's the but?
Well, the but is,
Thank you.
that seems somehow dishonest to me. I think you should always confront your own feelings. You'll feel better, I think, if you express your own feelings in a compassionate manner to someone whom you would like to understand what you're thinking. And I think the directness is really important there.
That's a
I
very...
think once you practice being part of your style, lifestyle, to be evasive. So I think we have to practice being more direct,
You know,
more forthright.
Actually,
But I could be wrong.
Actually, Mark, what you say may well be right, but Richard Bandler once said to me that if anybody ever brought up a question like that, I should look at him and say, don't take my word for it, just try it. That's what Richard says. Anyway, this is another tool. You can use it to try new behaviors, and you can use it to say new things. You simply quote someone who's already said it, and then say, what do you think about that? And it sinks in on a subconscious level. It is a great communication device, one tool. And it gives you the freedom to try something you don't feel comfortable to try. And it's okay to try things in a comfortable way. Would you rather try something comfortably or less comfortably? You know, there's an old theory that there's no gain without pain. You know, I don't know who's been spreading that story, but as far as I can tell, Gold's Gym is the only place that believes it. You know, the idea that it has to be difficult to make changes in your life is a story which may or may not be true. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But this is another tool you can use to communicate. Try it. See what result you get by using a quote from someone else. Mark, thank you. I appreciate that. You give me an opportunity every day to learn to respond to you in new ways, and I appreciate that. I know you're just helping me grow. Thank you.
I thought the movies had that.
And, you know, if you could do me a favor, but from time to time, do this during the workshop. If you could please be sure to remember to talk to someone at least once or twice while I'm doing something. If you would do that, you'd give me an opportunity to respond again. And everybody here an opportunity to see how we respond and deal with one another. So would you do that with me?
This little enclave over here has ethical problems with this suggestion.
I'm glad he does. I think it's very important to have ethical problems. I don't want you to be ethically complacent. Now, I'm going to ignore this section. I'm not going to ignore it because I want to, but because a friend of mine once told me, Michael, when you have these kind of problems, the best thing to do is move on to the next technique. If you don't want the ratchet wrench, use the screwdriver. Yes?
I was going to say, I actually used this technique when I was 14. I'm glad I know there's a name for it. I was in a situation where a person who had some authority over me was holding forth at a party, basically blaming my generation, of which I was the only representative in the room at the time.
And unelected.
And unelected, yes, for drug dealing. This was the specific subject. Drug pushers, how they should all be shot, da-da-da-da-da. Meanwhile, this particular individual had a nasty habit, and anytime anyone's glass looked like it might somewhere in the next 20 minutes become empty, refilling it, including people who were driving, etc. And he was quite forceful about it. Well, no. I was the only 14-year-old. Everybody else was probably over 40.
And specifically, how did you use quotes with this person?
Well, while he was running on and on about teenagers and drug problems, he was trying to force people into having more drink than they wanted.
Yeah.
And I was speaking to some adults about this at the party, and I was mentioning that there was a discussion at school the other day where we were discussing drug dealing and drug pushing. And of course, alcohol is a drug. And we really came to the conclusion throughout the class that someone who tries to force alcohol on a person who does not wish to imbibe, or more alcohol than they wish to imbibe, is really no different than someone who's pushing heroin or speed.
And what happened after you said this?
There was dead silence throughout the room. I got a filthy look, but I was not punished because I hadn't said anything about that one individual who had authority over me. I was speaking of a debate we had in school about an entirely different subject.
I think that's a great
Thank you.
example of that method that's ethically applied.
Thank you. That's a nice use of it. Now, here's a sneaky dissociation technique that I want to recommend to you. All right, you've heard the phrase, you don't get two chances to make a good first impression. Have you heard that? Who believes it? Come on. Who doesn't believe it? Who wants to do a Pontius Pilate and wash his hands of the question? Okay. It's true, but you can restart a communication if you blow it. Now, there are two ways of doing it that are useful. These are not the only two ways. Is this clear? These are not the only two ways. These are not the only two ways. But these are two ways. Have you ever had an argument where you could see it was going nowhere and you were feeling more and more frustrated and you were getting angry and they were getting angry? Technique number one is very simple. Stop right there and say, just a minute. I've really muffed this up miserably. You apologize for screwing it up because you're responsible for the outcome. Agreed? You apologize for muffing it up. And you ask them, can we begin again at the beginning? And if they agree to do that, you can, in fact, in many instances, unless you got a Scotch-Irish mother like mine, you can, in many instances, begin at the beginning. All you do is get their agreement that you can begin again. You can do this with your parents if they don't agree to let you go out on a date when you're 16. Your father's going to lock you in a room when he gets a chance, let me tell you that. I was not talking about your daughter, Robert. I was talking about someone else's daughter somewhere else. That's called lying. I was actually talking to your daughter. But everybody else knows it, so now you can't do it. Okay. If you get agreement from people that you can begin again, I've really muffed it up, and I want you to know that this is not going the way I wanted it to. Would you mind if we started again? Because I really don't want to have this kind of discussion with you. They'll go, yeah. Sometimes walking out the room and come back in and say, Mary, it's good to see you. How are you doing today? And start again a different way. Very often, not always, underline the word very often, not always, you can in fact begin at the beginning. And you're able to get another opportunity to make a good outcome out of the discussion. Does everybody understand this method? Okay? Who's responsible for your communication?
You are.
Atta babe, I like it. Second technique is very simple. It's a dissociation technique. I used to do this in public speaking. Have you ever given a speech and had it fall on deaf ears? The crowd didn't buy it. Raise your hands if you have. If you haven't, you haven't been talking to enough crowds. Now come on, now raise your hands. Okay. If you blow it in a speech, I've done this with Rotary clubs and I've done it with political groups. If you can see you're getting nowhere and you're alienating your audience and whatever you're doing is not playing in Peoria, take a step to this side, take one step to your left and point to where you were standing and say, you know, that's what's the matter with a lot of political communication today. It's exactly that kind of attitude that keeps people like you and me from really talking. And then try it all over again from another perspective.
What I meant to say was...
No, you don't say what I meant to say. You point out that as an example of how not to communicate. That's exactly what's wrong with most political communication each day, isn't it? It doesn't get through. People don't understand your real concerns, and that's what's the matter with politics today. They're in agreement with you. If they weren't in agreement, they'd be applauding you and responding to you, wouldn't they? What you're acknowledging is the communication didn't work, and that's what's wrong with it. Now you try something different. If you were being very logical and it didn't work, you can be that weeby, greeny, wimpy, nice that Mark's trying to affect now as another ploy to improve his image. I'm just kidding. He knows it's not a ploy to improve his image. That is beyond improving it. But it's another way of marketing it, packaging it. I'm teasing. It's a very simple approach. I would like you to make an agreement with me. Here's the agreement I'd like you to make. Next time you're blowing a communication with a crowd, would you be willing to experiment and try it? Who would? All right? Mark it down. It's called dissociation. You take a step to the side, you point to where you were, you condemn it as being wrong and mistaken, and that's exactly why people don't communicate. It is, because had it communicated, you wouldn't be doing this. Yes?
I can see that as an advantage, almost improving, because when you start out with some group, you guys who would say a neutral stance, they don't really agree or disagree, they don't know who you are, where you're coming from. But if they just being all pissed off at you, and then you say, now, didn't that piss you off? So they see you as someone who knows one thing that they agree with.
Yeah, you're on their side now. What you've done is you've gained rapport. Yes?
I used to have a habit in high school. I never wrote anything down. I was always, actually, I still have that problem. But at one debate, I wrote everything down. I wrote down what I was going to say, and it was falling flat on its face. And I did pretty well in impromptu public speaking. I sat there, I looked at it, and I said, this is ridiculous. I'm not talking to you, I'm reading. And I ripped it up, and I said, now, let's talk.
That's a great technique.
And I got better marks.
That's a nice spin on this. I recommend that you actually point to where you work, because people will visualize you standing there and being a jerk.
I was seated.
And okay, well, seated, that can be a little more difficult. And if you're sitting at a panel, but I want to make you aware that these are 2 ways to give yourself 2 opportunities to communicate with the people. And if you're taking responsibility and you really want to communicate, this gives you one more choice, one more way to reach out to that person. It's a very simple technique. That's why you're going to look at it and go, it's so simple. Let me tell you something. A paperclip is simple too. Somebody made billions of dollars with a paperclip. A staple is pretty simple. A zipper. You ought to read the everyday origins, or the extraordinary origins of everyday items. There's a book written a couple years ago. They tell you where these things come from. Somebody got tired of buttoning stuff and wanted to do zippers. How about Velcro? Some of these things seem very simple, but they work. Don't worry about the simplicity. Nothing wrong with simplicity. It helped write the King James Bible. It keeps Strunk and White style book in circulation. Simplicity can be very powerful. So don't be afraid of the fact it's simple. Now I'm going to go to this. How many unorthodox techniques have I done? 3? Have I done 3? Has anybody been keeping count? 4? Okay, well then I'll do number 5. It's called reframing. Reframing is a standard Ericksonian approach. I like Milton Erickson. I think the man was a genius. Very under-recognized. Reframing, what you do is you can do 2 kinds of reframing, at least 2. One is a meaning reframe, and the other is a content reframe. I want you to think about a frame around a picture. All right? And it has to do with how you understand the event. Here's a story that Leslie Cameron Bandler tells. A woman was in family therapy with her, and this woman was a neat freak. Anybody have any of those in your family? My mother used to empty ashtrays out as you were smoking. This is a neat freak. This woman had one of these kind of houses where, you know, they have the little drape like they have in church. What's that little thing called? That little, the rope to keep people out in the living room. And the couches were covered with the plastic, God forbid, that people live in the living room. And she would continually, you know how you have that fluff carpet? She would continually be using the rotary vacuum to keep it all fluffed up. Well, what happened is sooner or later some child would come home and ruin the effect by walking on the carpet, the creep. And this woman would go nuts. This it put her in la-la land, you know. You're ruining my house. I do that. Look at that. I work so hard. It looks beautiful. You don't appreciate it. Well, naturally, this makes it a little hard to live in the same house with a woman that won't let you walk on the carpet. Walking on the walls is not generally done. It really gets them dirty, and then she'd be washing the walls, and you'd have to learn how to levitate or something. So she's in there with Leslie Cameron Bandler, and Leslie looks at her and listens to this for a while. And it's very clear that the meaning of that messy carpet is, I'm not a good mother, I'm not a good housekeeper. That's the way she's looking at it. That's the way she is perceiving it. That is her frame. Okay? And Leslie says to her, I'd like you to close your eyes. And I'd like you to visualize your home. I want you to see the carpet all fluffy. I want you to see it perfectly beautiful. The house smells magnificent. Everything looks beautiful. And the woman starts smiling. And she says, and I want you to realize that that means the people you love are nowhere near. Oh. Immediately gets an odd reaction. Immediately gets a frown. Now I'd like you to, in your mind, put footprints in the carpet and realize that people you love are close by so that they can love you and you can love them. And she smiled. Now what did she do? She could have done the obvious, which is say, look, kids walk on carpets, that's the way it is. Rocks are hard, water's wet, kids walk on carpets. And it wouldn't have sunk into the woman. What she did is she gave a new meaning to the footprints. And she did it by setting the woman up in such a way that she began with her reality. Clean means good mother, good housekeeper. 2, clean means the people you love and you're doing it for aren't around. That's bad. Now put the little steps in the carpet. Now what's that mean? It means the people you love are really close. Now she got to feel good about seeing the little footprints in a carpet. Guess what? She anchored it, used a standard Pavlovian, just a simple grab on the wrist. And the woman was able to come to terms and deal with it very comfortably. She didn't feel bad. She didn't go through the neat freak. Now, of course, she didn't go to slob heaven either. There are a lot of ways to reframe. This is one. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 that are very simple. Okay, has anybody ever had you say, has anybody got a trait that they consider bad? I don't want a trait named. I don't need to do therapy, and nobody needs it either. Okay, how many of you think being stupid is bad? How many of you are too stupid to know the question? Okay, no. Robert's going, I think that's me. All right, what does stupid mean? Think about it a second. What does stupid mean to you usually? And not a trick question, serious. What's it mean?
Somebody shut off their brain.
Somebody shut off their brain, sir.
You know better than what you're doing.
Know better than what you're doing?
They don't understand me.
Oh, you don't understand me? That's a pretty good interpretation. How about this? All right, we think that it's bad to be stupid, right? Isn't that the frame?
No.
Stupid is bad for us. To many people, right?
No.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm glad you're disagreeing with me, but shut up. I mean that with love. Okay. Actually, I would never say that. That would be the sort of thing that I might expect out of this gentleman over here. I could never stoop to saying that you're stupid. Okay, now, I'm teasing. He knows I'm cheating. All right. Usually most people think stupid means bad, unintelligent means bad. But how about this? You know, being stupid is a good way of getting smarter people to do stuff for you. I don't know about you, man, but I find I'm just absolutely terrible working on cars. I'm terrible on fixing things around the house. I can't do anything mechanical. Guess who does all of it? My wife. I'm going to continue to exhibit this behavior as long as I'm allowed, because it gets me what I want. And I tell her flat out, I say, honey, I intend to remain incompetent here. I promise I'll be intelligent at dinner conversations, and I promise we'll go out to dinner, but I want to be incompetent around the house. And she goes, okay, I expected it anyway. You intellectuals are all the same. Stupid, most people think is bad. How about incompetent? Almost everybody I know, when they go to see a therapist, this blows my mind. Why are you going to therapy? I'm going to therapy because I want more confidence. I want to become more confident. Does anybody ever would like a little more confidence? No cheating, come on. Let me tell you what happens if you're too confident. The worst thing that can happen to you is you'll be too confident, and you'll screw up. You'll believe you can do things you can't. I feel very confident about the tightrope. Oh, too bad, splattered on the sidewalk. I feel very confident. How about this? I feel very confident in my ability to deal with my boss. So I went in and asked for a raise. He fired me. Maybe confidence is bad. Maybe sometimes you can be too confident. Maybe lack of confidence is nature's way of keeping you from hurting yourself. Did you ever think of that? That's a reframe. I just gave a new meaning to the word lack of confidence. How about,
That won't help you if you're unhappy.
well, you know, unhappiness might be another way for you to realize there's more to learn. Reframe. How about, nobody ever takes care of me? Here's one I hear from husbands. Nobody pays attention to me in our family. Nobody cares about me. And my reaction is always, whew, thank God you've learned to stand on your own 2 feet. You have no idea how many people go through life groveling, seeking other people's approval, and here you stood on your own 2 feet. Thank God. I've just given them a reframe. I've given them another way of looking at it. All right. The point is that any characteristic is useful somewhere. How about assertiveness? I know so many women that take assertiveness training. Has anybody here ever taken assertiveness training? You failed, right? I didn't do well enough to be able to raise my hand. You know what happens to a lot of women who take assertiveness training? They get fired. They get fired because men interpret the phrase assertive as bitchy. She wasn't assertive, she was bitchy. Do you think it's a good idea to be assertive to a stick-up man? Give me your money. I don't have to. I have a right to my property. Let me tell you a thing, Buster. That might be dangerous behavior. But it's also useful in some places, agreed? It's not an issue of whether behavior is good or bad. It's a question of where and when it is useful. Is that distinction clear? Does everybody understand? Among those of you who don't understand, I want you to recognize that your confusion is your mind's way of letting you know that there's more to learn here. And so you'll pay more attention. That's a reframe. Anything can be useful somewhere. Even violence can be useful somewhere. Can't it? Who can give me an instance of where violence would be useful? Self-defense. That could be very useful then. How about when being helpless would be useful? When would being helpless be useful?
Self-defense as well. I mean, you can just play the weakling and pitiful, and children do this all the time.
That's right. You've seen animals roll over and expose their bellies, and the other animal doesn't kill them. He goes, oh well, I won. Right? Fortunately, he's never dealt with people in like Detroit. That won't work. Oh, belly? Okay, here's the knife. But you're correct. Every behavior can be useful somewhere. Whenever you hear something is bad, ask yourself where it might be useful. Where would it be useful to be ignorant? Want me to give you an area where it might be useful to be ignorant? You can ignore it later if you like. How? You eat the hamburger. No, that's not good. That's where ignorance can be heart attack causing. How about? That might be one. How about another one? How about this one? Maybe it'd be better if we were ignorant of some of the world news. I mean, if a hotel burns down in Guatemala, I can't change that. Why should I feel bad about it? Maybe, in fact, that'll make me more depressed. Maybe the news is making me depressed. Maybe ignorance could be useful. There's other behaviors, and we're used to thinking of some behaviors as being bad. We're used to, she never talks, that's bad. Can anybody give me a payoff of not talking much?
She listens.
She listens. How? What else?
Never be stupid.
That's right. Remember the old, it's better to remain silent and have people think you're stupid than open your mouth and remove all doubt? Oh, Mark, not that last statement had anything to do with you.
I can't help but think you're putting the same moral value on emotions ranging with wise ignorance to me, or perhaps patience. A person is not particularly more patient, willing to listen and make their contribution in more selective things. There's a wide gulf between those two things. I don't think there's any appropriate time for ignorance. I think you have an obligation as a human being to gain knowledge. How you deal with that in the emotional state is an entirely different thing. I also think the criteria shouldn't be anything can be useful, but only anything can be useful if it makes you happy and puts you on the road to your ultimate goals. You can't accept your criteria for these.
I appreciate that. The word useful deletes part of the sentence. Useful for what? I am, of course, presupposing useful in contributing to your interests, useful in producing your happiness, and enabling you to achieve your long-range best interests.
Very beneficial in your short term.
Now,
gratification with your long term is going to be really happy.
that, in fact, Mark, you may be correct, but as another person wants to say.
Well, with ignorance, ignorance means that you don't know everything, and you have to spend your whole life searching for every single information about a particular. Say you want to market a tape, you don't want to get every single bit of information about it. It's like perfectionism. If you look for perfection, then you're just wasting a lot of time.
Okay, yes, sir.
There's a study being done, and there's a paper being written, they've got a book on the growth of ignorance, because every time something new is discovered, everybody who doesn't know about it now is ignorant of more. So the world is becoming more and more ignorant.
So you can't help it. You're becoming more ignorant whether you like it or not. It's correct. There's better than 35,000 hardback books published in English just in the U.S. every year. New books. And in Canada, there's probably another 2. Oh, come on. You guys always take the heat. You know what I'm talking about. But it's all done by Canadians who have moved to the United States because U.S. people can't read and write. Now, what I'm pointing out to you is the technique, the method called reframing, simply lets you realize that any behavior can be useful, can be effective, can contribute toward some positive outcome in some place, at some time, for some people, in some circumstances. I'm not recommending universal ignorance. I'm not recommending universal stupidity. I'm telling you that any behavior can be serving your interests given specific context. And all reframing does is it enables you to give people another way of looking at it. For example, unemployment is bad. Right? Isn't it bad to be unemployed? Everybody tells you it's bad to be out of work. Can anybody give me 3 benefits of being out of work? What's one?
You might pursue an alternative career that's more successful.
What's another?
Well, the economy needs it a little bit. So
A benefit to you. A benefit to you.
Yeah, the economy,
Okay.
unemployment,
More time.
What?
If you have a family, more time to spend at home.
Okay. What might be another specific benefit to you? Might it give you also an opportunity to make new decisions about your career options? Maybe you're in the wrong career and your boss did you a favor. I've been fired from jobs and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Has anybody been fired from a job and found out it was a good thing you were fired because you might still be in it?
Actually, that's almost always the case. People do not realize that, but they almost always pursue higher career goals and objectives after being fired by
Okay.
an employer.
So here's something that appears to be bad immediately. I've been thrown out of work, I've been fired. Bad. May in fact, if you reframe it, be a good thing. It might be an opportunity to grow. It might be an opportunity for you to pursue other options or to learn new things. It might be an opportunity for you to express your skills in job hunting. It's not that hard to find a job anyway. Yes?
I want to go back to the ignorance thing. I can see just where the appearance of ignorance can be useful, as in some of Ayn Rand's books when the hero characters would force the villain characters to come right out and say what they meant instead of understanding the innuendos. Like, I don't know what you mean. I don't understand. What is it exactly you're trying to say? And they're trying desperately not to say it. They have, well, no, Ayn Rand is like,
In the courtroom, matter of fact, with Hank Reardon in the courtroom where he's put on trial for the crime of selling coal to a man who wants to buy it. Ooh, what a scary thing. Now, I want to make you aware that anything can be useful somewhere under some circumstances at some times for some people. All reframing does is enable you to put a new meaning or a new understanding on it. Is that clear? What it's used for. Sometimes, one of the worst things your kid can do is really develop a negative self-image. And they'll do it because their friends, maybe your kid isn't athletic, and his friends go, "You're clumsy. You're not a good athlete." Now, if your kid considers that bad and feels bad about himself, that might in fact hurt his performance and prevent your child from developing a good self-concept. But suppose you put a spin on it. That's wonderful, son. That'll give you an opportunity to become a thoughtful, intelligent person like Albert Einstein or such and such, and give him other role models. There's no reason he has to feel bad about the fact he's not the world's greatest athlete. Maybe that's a good thing. We've got enough basketball players and baseball players. Maybe we need more physicists and psychologists and doctors and dentists, but no tax collectors. Okay? Now, those are 5 a little unconventional. I want to do the value X-ray. This is one that I rather like. It's not at all, yes?
You said you're going to give us 2 types of reframe. Meaning reframe, and what was the other?
Content. All right, I was dealing primarily there in meaning reframe. In content, what you do is take the same concept, stupidity. Stupidity might mean, and then you give them new content for it. For example, ignorance might mean there are a lot of things you don't know that you don't need to know and shouldn't waste your time on. Give them new facts to fill in that frame. Okay, but basically it's a new way of understanding something. A lot of times, most of our most damning self-criticisms are really unfair. We're really overly harsh on ourselves. Except Mark, who isn't nearly harsh enough. I'm sorry, Mark, you're just so obvious. You're just right there.
I am actually very harsh. I mean, nobody sees that, but
You know, I had a friend that used to say, you know, your problem is that you're not very humble. And I said, I'm not very humble, but I've got something worse than humility. I've got self-doubt. I go home and think about things that I did and wonder whether I should, and wonder whether I want to make that change. That's what smart people use instead of humility. Humility is a poor man's substitute for good, intelligent self-doubt. This drove him crazy. He went home and went, what the hell was that all about? It's very important to send crazy makers back home with their own medicine. Now, I want to talk about what I call the value X-ray. And it's called, has anybody ever had the following situation? Someone says, I like a lot about the Freedom Party, but I can't join because of your position on abortion or...
you don't need to go any further. That's the one.
Okay. Okay. Now, it's interesting And I want you to be aware of this. It's very interesting to realize a lot of times we say, well, this person's in agreement with us on 97.8% of the issues. It seems fully reasonable that they ought to join us. Is that sort of your feeling? Is that your belief system?
Oh, yeah.
Let me give you a premise. And the point is that most people, I would say all people, but I haven't checked with all of them, so I'll say most people, seem to have the following attitude. And that's that not all issues are created equal. So what I do is I ask them to measure stuff. You ask them to weigh it. Try it like this. It's very simple. I'll give you 3 or 4 different ways of finding out how important an issue is to somebody. How important is it to the person? And there's some of them you shouldn't waste your time with the person because that's the only issue they're concerned with. One is use the standard 1 to 10 scale. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most important, absolutely must be done. If we avoid this, we've lost our humanity. 1 being unimportant, shouldn't waste our time on it. Absolutely must do, not important to do at all. Where would you place making abortion illegal on your scale? Ask them to weigh it for themselves. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 meaning that is that important, the most important issue in politics today. And 1 being it's not important at all, it doesn't really matter to me, I'm sort of neutral on it. Ask them to weigh it. And do you know what most of the people who really get hung up on abortion will give you? Anybody want to guess where they put it on the scale?
4 or 5.
10. I once went to a gathering called the American Freedom Caucus. Sounds nice, doesn't it? It's got a nice, good sounding apple pie name. It was sponsored by the Moonies. Reverend Myung Sung Moon. I was given a free ticket to go there to critique their speakers. I was given one because a client of mine said, you really ought to see these people. I think they got some good ideas. Well, I'm glad I saw the people, but I disagreed with the second half of the sentence. You know, and I was waiting for the armbands to break out and them to start singing Tomorrow Belongs to Me. It was that kind of thing. I was sitting at a table with a fellow from Oklahoma, which is where my wife is from. And he was talking about free enterprise is great, and we've got to roll back government, we've got to cut on taxes. And I thought, hey, you know, this guy's an ally. And I listened to him a couple minutes, and he talked about some social issues. And I finally turned to him and I said, if you could only accomplish 3 political goals in your lifetime, what would they be? He said, ban abortion, kill drug dealers and probably drug users, and put women back in the kitchen. And his wife sat next to him and smiled, which led me to believe that she deserved him. Yeah, it's all right. People sometimes do get what they deserve, though not always. He very clearly, well, thank God we don't get all the bad stuff we deserve, right? So it's like the guy applying for the job. We'll pay exactly what you're worth. No thanks, I'm getting more than that where I work right now.
That was the implication.
Of course, of course. Now what's interesting is this guy basically said, all this free enterprise language is just mental furniture. That's just stuff I talk about. In terms of what I do in my everyday life, this is what's important. Now, I told you scale of 1 to 10 is a good way of rating it. There are different ways of doing it. Ask them this. If you could only accomplish 1 political goal, hypothetical question, if you could only accomplish 1 political goal, what would it be? And what they've got to do when they answer the question is they've got to evaluate what's important and what ain't. Everybody in this room would probably have a different first item on their agenda. And that's okay, because you're going to find they cluster around very similar things. But if you ask a single issue person, whether it's gun control, whether it's abortion, whether it's religious concerns of some kind, blue laws or Sunday closings or something like that, they will say that'll be the one thing they want to do. Here, try a variant. You have total control over Canada for 1 second. You get to push a button. There's a machine that lists every single issue in Canadian politics. You get to pick the button you want and push it, but you can only push 1 button and make 1 change in Canada. Which button are you going to push? And they'll tell you right out what their key issue is. People do not weigh items the same. Let me give you your test. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen in the room, you only have so much time in your life, and you know it and I know it. You only have so much time that you can involve yourself in political activities. If you could only accomplish one thing politically, and don't give me a broad thing like freeing Canada, one specific issue. I don't want any wimp solutions here. If you've only got one specific issue in Canada today that you get to make a change in, what would the one thing be? And I want to raise your hand as it occurs to you. Yes?
Education system.
Okay.
Because everything else follows.
See,
Everything else follows.
that's very good. And yours is? Censorship, because everything else follows. I'm teasing. Other people? Yes?
Taxation.
Taxation.
Abolish democracy.
Abolish democracy. Great, we've got dictatorship now, Mark. Okay.
Environmental?
That would be preferable, yes.
Environmental?
Environmental. Other people? Yes. What? Welfare. I'm not telling you there's a right or wrong answer. I want you to be aware that you have different evaluations as to the importance of each issue. And that's okay. Not everybody values each issue equally. If I were a woman, I think I would evaluate, if I were young, I would evaluate specifically women's issues, whether it's abortion or whether it's equal rights, as very, very, very important. Because I've seen women discriminated against very, very badly in the U.S. and Canada. That would probably be very important to me. Okay. But it's very clear that people do not weigh issues equally. So you've got to find a way of getting them to evaluate their issues. And you can do it with the push button technique. If you had a button, and you can push the button, and you can change it. It's entirely up to you. Nobody else gets any input. It's your decision. What button do you push? They'll tell you. And if you're talking to most of your abortion people, I will guarantee you they'll tell you on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 9 or a 10. Don't take my word for it. Test it. Who would be willing to test it on someone on the abortion issue? Somebody had a boss with abortion. Was it yours? Would you? I want you to use the quotes technique. I met this guy over the weekend who is really weird. And he asked me to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most important thing in Canada today, and 1 not being important at all, how would you rate keeping abortion illegal or protecting the right to life? Where would you rate it on your personal scale, sir? That's what Michael asked me to ask. Okay, so I'll take the heat. I'll be in Las Vegas when I take it, but I will take it. Okay. Yes?
Actually, I would say that you should rephrase that saying, not even talk about the abortion is correct, and say what we want to change, because a lot of people to prove their point was pretend that that was the issue.
Oh, all right. Very good point. I wanted to frame it in there because he clearly announced that as an issue. No, she made a statement earlier to me.
So I'm just saying,
Oh.
you mentioned about abortion, but ask him, just approach him out of the blue and not even mention the word.
You can try it out of the blue if you want to do it.
See if he says it, but sometimes I've talked to people where they will just to prove their point, they'll say that was number 1 on their list.
Okay. Okay. Now, why is that important to do? What's the function of getting people to evaluate the importance of the issue? Well, suppose they give it a 2 on their scale. Suppose they do the abortion as a 2. Okay? Suppose they give it a 2. All right? You with me on this? Then you can say to them, well, it seems to me that in light of all your agreements with the Freedom Party on all these other things, and they name off the things they agree, that certainly our disagreement on this issue shouldn't prevent us from working together on all the things we agree on. Did you notice the setup and did you notice the framing of that? Yes?
That will never happen.
What?
If that will never happen, then if there's something that keeping someone away from the Freedom Party, they agree with a lot of it. If they regard it as true, it's nothing. It's going to be like they might casually say at a party, I agree with most of what we do, but I kind of don't like this. But they'll still be there at the parties because at the gatherings and meetings. And I think because they would probably feel strongly enough with the other issues.
Actually, what usually happens is, just to make you aware, is that most people don't weigh how important issues are. They're not clear in their own mind as to how important it is to them. And all you're asking them to do is identify how important is it really to you. How important is it to you? And when you do that, after they've said, well, it's a 2, or I don't agree with your position on the environment, or pick something that they don't particularly like about the Freedom Party. If you know that they also agree with a lot of things you do agree on, there's nothing wrong with saying, in light of the fact that it's on a scale of 1 to 10, a 3, and you agree with us on this and this and this and this and this, surely we could work together on these other things, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. In fact, I'm not asking you to take this on faith. Who would be willing to test it against reality? So you chickens want to debate it. You don't want to find out. That's okay. I did that too. I want to derive it from first principles. I don't want to know. Let me tell you, sensory reality is the only thing you can test it against. Check it out against your friends. I'm not asking you to believe me. I want you to test it. You'll have your people tell you. They will tell you. Yes?
Michael?
Yes.
Listen, on the abortion issue, if somebody right out says, what do you think about abortion? That's what how they're going to hit you. I say, I'm against abortion, personally. But I'm also against the government being involved in whether you can abort or not.
That might be appropriate. There's another approach you can use is...
Ease it a bit. Because I am against abortion,
Sure.
personally.
Okay.
And I'm not ashamed to say that.
Sure.
I think it's wrong.
Okay.
And I don't think we should do it. We should encourage the girls to have the baby and tell her it's no disgrace or get it wrong. You know?
Okay. I appreciate that's very reasonable. I'm sure that that works well for you. Yes.
This issue of 100% agreement with the parties, credo, if you will,
Yes.
is something that I don't think they exist in any party. I mean, the membership is not 100% in agreement with ownership. I work with people that are card-carrying members of the progressive conservatives, and
Sure.
they have very strong differences, and they will talk about it quite openly.
Exactly.
However, that one party is the one for which they can exercise the most political leverage in the direction they want the country to move in.
You're correct. In fact, people usually have a double standard toward the Freedom Party, you'll find. The double standard is, even though I disagree with the conservatives on everything in the world, except abortion, I'm willing to work with them on everything in the world, including abortion.
Right. And I never understand that. Even to this day, that sounds, I run into
Well,
that so often.
Let's take this evaluator, let's take this value X-ray and apply that to the other parties. Let's look at the NDP, let's look at the Liberals, and let's look at the Progressive Conservatives. All right? In the whole Progressive Conservative set of values and programs, what percentage of those programs would you personally say you agree with? Hear that phrase. What percentage of the programs would you say you agree with? And they'll give you a percent. People, they'll say, well, I don't know. Take a guess. I trust your instincts. I know you'll be pretty close. You'll be within 5 or 10 points. They might go, well, I'm 60% in agreement. All right, to pick a number. I'm just picking it out of the blue. How about the Liberals? Well, I'm like 15% in agreement with them. How about the Rhino Party? Hey! How about the NDP? And they'll go, well, maybe 5% in agreement. All right? Based on what you know about the Freedom Party, what percentage of agreement would you say you're in? All right? You're getting them to measure their level of agreement, their percentage of agreement. They might go, well, I'm 95%. And the 5% they disagree might be the abortion. Okay? What percentage agreement would you say? You understand that? Got it? They're measuring it. Now you say to them, based on your own evaluation, wouldn't you say it would be more reasonable to work with people you're in more agreement with rather than people you're in less agreement with? And then shut up. That's the hard part for us. You know what you do after you ask the question? You have to keep on talking. Absolutely. Mine was dry cleaned. That's why it's so crispy, squeaky clean. Now, you can actually do that politically. Don't take my word for it. Test it out. I have done that in the U.S. It works. Ask people what percentage of the programs of the options, the other options, NDP, Liberal, and Progressive Conservative. Ask them what percentage agreement do they have with them. Would you say you're 85% in agreement with them? 75%? 10%? What percentage would you say? They will measure it based on their own internal scale of measurement. And they will measure their agreement or disagreement with the Liberals and with the NDP. Then, presuming you've told them about the Freedom Party, and you better have, shame on you if you hide your light under a bushel basket. Then, you'd say, what percentage of agreement would you say you're in with the Freedom Party? And they will say something like 110. Wrong answer. They'll say something, it might be 60%, it might be 70%. Then take their information and say, well, in light of the fact that you're only 5% in agreement with NDP, 15% with the Liberal, and 40% with the Conservatives, and you tell me that you're 85% in agreement with us, in light of your own judgment, doesn't it seem reasonable that you and I ought to work together since we agree so much? You know what they'll say if you shut up? Just say.
They're afraid of losing their vote.
Just
That's
say.
one of the biggest.
Just say. Do you know what they'll say? They'll remain quiet for a while, most of them. And then they'll usually say, "Oh, I haven't thought of that. I hadn't thought of it." And that's a normal response. Nobody says you have to join now. You have a right to think about it. And I encourage them to exercise that right. Now, Mark, just a minute. I know where you are.
I was going to offer proof to your theory.
Okay. Oh, well, then I'll call on you earlier. It's very important that we get no cognitive dissonance in my workshops. Now, what usually happens is they'll say, "I want to think about it." And they will think about it. We're so scared when we ask them the question, they'll come up with the wrong answer, that we have to feed it to them. Let them come up with their own answer. Trust them. For God's sakes, they've got good minds. Trust them. You ask them a very simple question, and it works. It works. Write down the following. If I try this on 10 people in the next week, and I'll even go so far as to say, try it on your own family. Now, how's that for an act of courage? I'm talking about your mom and your dad. Now, this is where it's, uh-oh. My parents have long ago written me off as mentally ill. And that's all right, I don't mind, as long as they keep paying the bills to Happy Farms. What will happen will be, out of the 10, you'll find 1, maybe 2 of them will convince themselves to the point where they're willing to come to 1 meeting. That's 10 or 20%. After that, that's a pretty good closing ratio. You think 10 or 20% isn't good, it's excellent. For God's sake, direct mail advertising gets a 0.5% and they make millions. You've done direct mail. When you're doing it with your best list, you're going to get a higher percentage. But with your general list, 0.5%, 1%, very good, isn't it? 20% is phenomenal. Think about it. If you could get 1 out of every 10 or 2 out of every 10 who'd be willing to come to just 1 meeting, that might be enough to get them interested enough to come again. Mightn't it? Mark, you had a point.
Yeah, actually, this is how I became converted to socialism and movement myself. And when I was working for the NDP in 1979, I met some candidates for freedom at the elections. And ironically, they came to my store because I was clapping for them at the elections. I was only supposed to clap for the NDP candidates because what we were there to do. And I ended up clapping for them because they compellingly made so much sense. I couldn't help myself. One part of my mind was still operating on all cylinders. And I was clapping for them.
Conditioned reflex.
So they came by and visited me, and I found myself, this is amazing, I found myself agreeing with everything they had to say, except I said, "We're going to do pollution." They said, "We're going to privatize the waterways." And I immediately said, "No, that's not all stupid." And I actually argued with them, and then finally got so frustrated that the only thing I disagreed with them was on that, and that I still wasn't going to convert from the NDP. Then they called me stupid and left. Right?
A hell of a closing technique on me.
And oddly enough, though, I remember sitting out doing the laundry one day a couple months later, and it occurred to me that I was being really unreasonable because when I got down to it, there was so little I agreed about in the parties I was supporting, ironically, and so much. And I convinced myself that one area of disagreement is no basis for a non-relationship. And I mean, because if you had that kind of criteria, where else you wouldn't have any friends, you wouldn't have any lovers, you wouldn't have anything.
Every bit of her?
Clean it up, guys. Take it outside,
So
as I say. Now,
that's how I came about it. I applied that very process to myself at the time, and I said it's unreasonable to do anything else.
now, I want to warn you of a couple things. Okay. Warning number 1. Be aware of this. When people stop to think, the silence is uncomfortable to us. We feel a certain amount of anxiousness. If you ask a question and the person doesn't answer right away, how do you feel? Ask me a question.